Alright, welcome guys. It's been a while. So, hopefully you guys are studying pretty well. This chapter is very heavily concentrated, a lot of contents, but don't be frustrated, just relax. Everything will be okay. Hopefully you guys are watching this video will help you, and I'm here to help you guys to ace your exams. So, um, quick announcement I have to make. I skipped 14.1 initial part of the chapters because those are pretty simple enough that you guys can go over on your own. And I actually wanted to cut some materials because there's a lot. So I'm going to start with the blood supply. And um, this video just serves to help you guys to understand the concept better, not too more in detail. So some of the details I will probably not going to go over, but to help you guys understand the concepts, I will try to use a lot of examples that will be helpful for you guys to um, better understand the concepts. I know this chapter is very big. Chapter 14 is the heaviest chapter in this exam, so make sure you guys study pretty well. And if you have any questions, just leave a comment in the chat or chat in the comments. Just let me know. If there's any conceptual errors, feel free to let me know so I can go in and edit. Or if you just want to leave any comments, just go ahead and leave a comment. I'll be glad to check it out. All right. Like I said, I'm gonna go start with brain protection and support. Okay. So brain protection. We have several meninges layer, dura and arachnoid and pia matter. Those serves to the basic meninge layers that protects the brain. So those I'm actually going to skip it because those are really easy to understand. Just know that those are three major layers. And we also have CSF that are made in chord plexus, which will circulate around the subarachnoid space and will eventually drain out to the sinuses and to your veins. So those, if you have any question about that, just feel free to comment and I can definitely post a video on how your circulation works. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about blood supply to the brain. The blood supply. Your brain needs heavy blood supply, right? Your brain is the biggest part that uses most of the oxygen. Without oxygen, your brain cannot function. So, we have a lot of blood supply to the brain. First, we need to begin with basic. So, we have the heart. So make sure you guys picture a heart. So we have aorta that branches off from the heart. It's usually from the left ventricles. So where your ventricles, left ventricle will pump the blood out to the aorta and to your rest of the body. So if you think about the structure of the aorta, it actually makes a fast U-turn at the superior portion of the heart, right? And what happens is you will have three different branches of the aorta. The first branch will be brachiocephalic. So your brachiocephalic. You guys heard it. It's brachiocephalic. Second branch will be common carotid artery. Okay? Second branch is common carotid artery. And the third branch will be the subclavian artery. So I'm going to go over this one more time. From the aorta, you'll have three major branches. Brachiocephalic artery, common carotid artery, and you'll also have subclavian artery. Okay? So major blood supply is actually from the common carotid artery and subclavian. Before we actually move on, I have to talk more about brachiocephalic artery more in details. So brachiocephalic is actually branching off from the aorta, And also, there's two more branches off the brachiocephalic. So it'll be your right subclavian artery and your right common carotid artery. So technically, we have two subclavian and two common carotid artery, but right side will branch off of brachiocephalic artery, while the left side will actually branch off from the aorta right itself. Okay, so make sure you guys keep draw this out until you guys remember. Um, these are the basic, okay, how your heart supplies the brain to your heart supplies the blood to your brain. Okay, and from so we have the major blood supply to the brain with using the common carotid artery and subclavian artery, left and right. Okay, so from common carotid artery, we can actually branches off into external carotid artery and internal carotid artery, which right now in the slides, you can actually see the internal carotid arteries. So we have the left and right internal carotid arteries. And what about vertebral arteries? It actually clips off from the subclavian. So two vertebral arteries are from left and right subclavian arteries. And you'll have two internal carotid arteries branches off from common carotid artery. Okay? So now let's talk about how those carotid arteries and vertebral arteries will supply the brain. All right, if you look at the diagram carefully, so you'll see the aorta on the bottom, and you'll see the common carotid artery, right? Left and right. And from the common carotid artery, you'll have external carotid artery and internal carotid artery. And your internal carotid artery actually will pass through carotid canal. Yes, we learned those. Carotid canal on the temporal bone of the cranium, right? So your common carotid artery will branch into external and internal carotid artery, and your internal carotid artery will pass through carotid canal. Now, from so as you pass through carotid canal, what will happen? Well, brain is very important that you supply a variety of regions. So you need to you need to supply the blood to the interior side. You need to supply the blood to the posterior side, medial side, lateral, etc. So we can actually do a lot of things. So internal carotid artery actually will supply. This diagram is the inferior view, so it's actually easier to look at your blood supply of the brain. So let's begin with common, not common, carotid artery, internal carotid artery. So you'll see the carotid artery located near the pituitary gland. So that is the carotid artery. These two, left and right. So from carotid artery, you'll have a artery that branches off towards the anterior portion of the brain. That is called anterior cerebral artery. So you have left and right. So actually wrap around the frontal cortex. And now, right off the carotid artery, you'll have middle cerebral artery. So which will actually surround the middle medial or middle portion of the cortex or cerebrum. And also, you'll have a posterior cerebral artery, but this one's a little bit different. It actually branches off from vertebral artery. So now that we have to talk about vertebral artery now. So vertebral artery, so we have two left and right. So we'll have two vertebral artery coming up and it will emerge. And once emerge, it becomes basilar. So that's the basilar artery. So vertebral will vertebral arteries and basilar arteries will actually supply the blood on your brain stem. So your medulla, midbrain, pons, cerebellum, those are all supplied by vertebral artery. So once those two vertebral arteries emerges together, it becomes basilar artery, which will actually supply the brain on the pons and midbrain. So once it does that, it will actually divide into two branches. Oh, excuse me. Okay. It will actually divide into two branches, which is the posterior cerebral arteries. And those posterior cerebral arteries will actually surround the posterior aspect of the cerebrum, such as your occipital lobe, your posterior portion of the temporal lobe, right? And from vertebral arteries, we could actually have anterior cerebellar artery branching off, and soon after vertebral arteries emerge together, we could actually have posterior cerebellar artery, which will supply blood for the anterior and posterior portion of the cerebellum. Okay, and then let's go to the next slide. Um, okay, that'll be better actually. Okay, so now we have artery that actually connects the anterior cerebral arteries together, which is called anterior commissure, anterior communicating artery. And we also have arteries that connect posterior cerebral arteries. So it actually doesn't connect to posterior communicating arteries, but actually what it does is it connects your posterior to the middle cerebral artery. So that's called a posterior communicating artery. So that's um, so that internal carotid canal, middle posterior communicating arteries, and anterior communicating arteries makes a structure called circle of Willis. Okay, so I'll actually upload a video that just explains the blood supply on its own, so it'll be more detailed. So if you guys are confused, don't worry. You guys can leave a comments. I'm happy to answer in more details. But the takeover of this video or this slide is that you'll have two vertebral arteries and two internal carotid arteries will supply the brain on the anterior portion, middle, and posterior aspect of the cerebrum. And the one that supplies the anterior side is called the anterior cerebral arteries, which is connected by anterior communicating arteries. And you'll have middle cerebral artery branching off the middle cerebral arteries branching off of internal carotid artery, which will supply the middle portion of the brain. And also, those two vertebrals actually will become one basilar artery, and it will branch off into two posterior cerebral artery, which will supply the blood to the posterior aspect of the cerebrum. That's it. That's all you need to know. And the middle structure with all the communicating arteries connecting each other, you'll make a circle of Willis. All right. That's not that important. That's just saying that you got the sinuses. But make sure you guys know these. If you have any questions, just make sure you ask me. All right. So stroke. Okay. So stroke. So cerebral vascular disease. That is what stroke means. So when there's loss of blood supply to the brain, it can actually harms a lot of things. So your brain without blood supply for more than 10 minutes, it actually starts dying. So it's very important. In stroke, what happens is either you can cause by clog in your arteries, or a rupture of the arteries, or there's wrong circulation of the blood in the arteries. So those are the possible ways. But we don't have to go over the types of the stroke. So make sure you guys know that stroke is the cerebral vascular accident, or also called cerebral vascular diseases. So blood-brain barrier, I'm gonna actually skip this one because um, this is just saying that your exercise actually form BBB, triple Bs, to protect your brain from um, those toxic and waste. So they're actually formed by tight junctions and generally only lipid-soluble compounds such as oxygens, carbon dioxide, steroids, and small alcohols can pass through and can diffuse into interstitial fluid CNS, and astrocytes is the one that regulate that. Okay, we're going to skip this one too. Breaks in the BBB. Oh, actually, there's a portion of the brain that does not have BBB. Wow, surprising, right? Okay, so what are the regions? Portions of hypothalamus, which allow hypothalamic hormones to enter circulation. So if you have BBB there, we cannot release hormones, right? It only allows small ions like lipid-soluble molecules to pass through. So we need to have some kind of permeability. So areas that requires hormone release have less BBB, such as your hypothalamus, posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, which allows ADH and oxytocin into circulation. And we have pineal gland, which secretes what? Melatonin, yes, which will be used for sleep. And we have cortical plexus, which supplies CSF. So any location that secretes very important neurohormones or substances, they don't really have BBB. Okay, important concepts to remember is that in central nervous system, the fibers are called tracts, and cell bodies or bundles of cell bodies are called nuclei. In PNS, bundles of fibers are called nerves, and cell bodies are called ganglia. So we actually have one brain region that named wrong. Can you guys guess? Yes, it's basal ganglia. So it's technically not basal ganglia. It's supposed to be basal nuclei. But somehow they decided to break the law, break the rule. So that's why they named it basal ganglia. But it's supposed to be basal nuclei. So we're going to talk more about basal nuclei soon. So we have the largest part of the brain. So that's the largest part of the brain. And it controls all conscious thoughts and intellectual functions such as decision making, judgments, thinking processes, everything that involves upper cognitive levels. And we have we also, our cerebrum allows to process the somatosensory information such as your touch, vibration sensations, pains, visual, auditory, such things like that. And we also have gray matter and white matter, which is heavily composed of neurons. Gray matter usually have cell bodies and unmyelinated axons, and we have white matter composed of um, myelinated axons usually. All right. So if you look at it in terms of the how it looks like, we could determine as a gyri sulcus. Well, gyri is the ridges of the brain, the surface of the brain, and we could actually divide it into sulcus with or shallow depression or deep depression is called fissures. And we can also divide into longitudinal cerebral fissures, so which will actually divide the brain into two hemispheres. And we could also identify the cerebrum as lobes. So we have the frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, such things like that. So we're going to talk more about this. All right, before we actually move on, so there are important lobes to talk about. So first is frontal lobes. So frontal lobes is primarily functions to help you make a judgment, your upper level cognitive consciousness, right? And and also very important for your speech, such as Broca's area, and also important for your motor planning, executing the movement, such as moving your muscles, and such as planning how you're going to move. And those secondary and premotor areas allow you to actually plan and execute. Okay. And we also have many different regions that allow in the frontal areas that actually associating. So allows you to actually determine um, it. And we also have somewhere called orbital frontal cortex, which allow you to actually um, interpret social cues, such as are you able to follow certain rules? Are you able to make rules? Those are actually happening in orbital frontal cortex, prefrontal cortex, judgment, make decision makings, and other frontal association cortexes allow the connection between those areas. And if you look at parietal lobe, we have several different regions. Primarily, we have the primary somatosensory cortex there, which allows the sensation, okay, guys, sensation of the some sensory information. So it doesn't actually interpret what it is. It will actually just know that, aware that something is sensed, okay? So that's what primary somatosensory cortex does. We also have other important areas that are very important for um, such as um, yes. Okay, We'll talk more about it later. And we have the occipital lobe, which primarily for the visual, and with the temporal lobe, which primarily does the um, auditory, also contains um, many different association cortices too. And if you actually dig temporal lobe, so there's fissure that divides the frontal and parietal from temporal lobe. It's called the lateral sulcus. And if you actually pry open the lateral sulcus, that medial portion you'll see is the insula, which will be your gustatory cortex. Okay? So, central sulcus will divide anterior frontal lobe from posterior parietal lobe. So your frontal lobe, parietal lobe is divided by central sulcus, which runs from horizontally, okay, transverse. And we have the precentral gyrus for on the frontal lobe, which does the motor functions, and with the postcentral gyrus, which does the sensation, somatosensory functions. Lateral sulcus will divide the temporal lobe from the frontal and parietal lobe. And if you pry open the lateral sulcus, you will see the insula. It lies medial to the lateral sulcus. And parietal occipital sulcus will actually subdivide parietal lobe from occipital lobe. Okay, so you'll see the central sulcus. I know it looks disgusting, but it's okay. Um, Central sulcus will divide your frontal and parietal, right? And you'll see the parietal lobe separated by parietal lobe and occipital lobe separated by the parietal occipital sulcus, and you'll see the lateral sulcus will divide a temporal lobe from frontal and parietal lobe. Okay, here are the regions of the brain. The precentral gyrus, also known as primary motor cortex. Postcentral gyrus, also known as primary somatosensory cortex. And if you pry open the lateral sulcus that lies in the medial side, that's the insula. And if you cut the brain into half in the size of the view, this is the view that you get. So we actually have more than just the lobe. We actually divide the brain into specific regions, such as um, cingulate gyrus, which is right up superior to the corpus callosum, which connects left and right hemisphere. And we can actually talk more about right there, parietal occipital sulcus, right? And we could actually cut occipital lobe into a two portion by calcarine sulcus, which will actually divide the superior and inferior portion of the occipital lobe. All right, this is a picture just demonstrating that we have different lobes. And like I said, calcarine sulcus actually divides your occipital lobe into two. So it divides your occipital lobe into a frontal and superior and inferior. And you'll see the lateral sulcus dividing the temporal lobe. And we have the singular gyrus, corpus callosum, which connects the left and right hemisphere. And you'll see more structures later. All right, so before we actually move on, I want to talk some areas. So we have several areas besides your lobes. So we can actually determine the brain by its functionality, not the regions. So, um, so the anatomical name will be something like precentral, postcentral, but the functional name will be something like primary motor cortex, primary somatosensory cortex, something like that. So we can actually divide it by the functionality and anatomically. Okay, so now we're going to talking more of like functionality. So we already talked about primary motor cortex and primary somatosensory cortex. So um, and we also have areas such as Wernicke's area, number 22, and we also have number 45 and 44, which is known as the Broca's area. And if you look, 47 will be the working memory. So this is how your memory is actually formed. Your memory is actually primarily formed in the hippocampus, but you guys don't have to know that. Okay. And your 11 will be the pre-orbital frontal cortex, which does all the judgments and um, allows the social cues interpretation. But you guys don't also have to don't know that. And you will see 17, the primary visual cortex, which sensing the visual stimuli. And we'll have the primary auditory cortex, which lies to the medial side of the temporal lobe. Okay, so that will be number 11 and 42. So if you look, number 22, more to the posterior aspect, that'll be Wernicke's area, and more to the temporal lobe aspect will be the auditory association cortex. All right, so next videos, I'm gonna go over more on the motor areas. So make sure you stay on tune and leave a comment if you like the videos. Like the videos, leave a comment, or just go ahead and study. Good luck on the study, guys.